I lean over your meaning's edge, and I feel the dizziness of the things you have not said. For thousands of years, electricity was something that you saw when you took an amber rod and a piece of cat fur and went into a darkened room and stroked the cat fur, and then when you would bring the amber rod close to the cat fur, you would see the crackle of static electricity through the cat fur. For thousands of years, that's what electricity was. Who would dream that you could light cities, that you could smelt metals, that you could illuminate the earth with this energy? And yet, you know, from the 1850s to the present, this was done. It's almost a literalizing, the final literalizing of the alchemical dream. You know, the average star only lives about 2 billion years. Most of the stars we see in the sky are older than that, but that's because they aren't average stars. Average stars come and go rather quickly, 2 billion years. But life, we know, has been on this single planet more than 2 billion years. This means that in contrast to the 19th century view of what's going on in the universe, life is not some weird parenthetical mistake or some fluke. No, life is a process on the scale of star formation in terms of its ability to determine the final end state of the history of the universe. Language binds us. We all believe the same thing because there are thousands and thousands of us here, all packed closely together, all more or less believing the same thing. If you go off into isolation, suddenly you're subject to a new set of laws, and you discover reality is very malleable and can change right in front of you. We are dreaming most of the time. The idea that there is a shared reality, the idea that you and I are living in the same universe, seeing the same things, walking on the same ground, is just a very high-level philosophical abstraction. It's very hard to prove it, or even to convince yourself that it's so. We live inside worlds constructed by our language, our history, our expectations. And when the unconscious, for some reason, becomes, as the Jungians say, activated, it moves into that world and it uses the entire stage of being to send messages back to you about reality. And it's an intelligence test, is what it is. It's an intelligence test. And if you take things at face value, for sure you failed the intelligence test. It's no game for the naive. The world we are living in is not at all as the linguistic structures we have inherited would have us have it. That we are actually living inside some kind of artificial construction which is potentially permeable by human understanding, but to date has not been. And we have been very much on the surface of things. The question that I raise constantly with myself, and it's interesting to talk about it with other people then, is, just what is going on? Just what do you think is going on? I mean, have you backed off from it? Do you have a grip on the outlines of the problem? Or are you just sort of adrift inside the context? Because the situation is mighty peculiar, friends. What we have here is a kind of creature made out of information, apparently loose in an environment of meaning, on the surface of a planet. We, as moderns, as inheritors of Cartesian rationalism, look out at a universe that our science tells us is energy, matter, conservation of mass and momentum, and yet we never notice the peculiar enigma posed by the question, who's looking? Who's looking? How is it possible that the coextensive continuum of apparent being is coordinated inside organism into an experience of ongoing becoming with which we have some kind of identification? This is very weird. It should provoke more comment than it is. I realized that not only the tired cliche that everything you know is wrong, but also that whatever is true cannot even be imagined. For anybody who has ever defined life as a quest, or a path, or a search, or a mystery, it's like you've hit the main vein. It is a path, it is a quest, there is a mystery, and when you get to the mystery, it's better than you thought it would be. It's better than you could think it would be. Hell, it's the mystery. That's what it is. And you say, I never thought, I doubted all the way. The whole time I was looking, I never thought. And yet, and it pays back. And you don't have to sign up with the rattlesnake people and the men who wear dresses and all this clergy and dogma and malarkey. That isn't it, The mystery is real. It can take the heat. Can you? That's the question. And this is what it is, that there is a secret about this planet, about the way things are here, and that you find out the secret by digging in the sub-basement of your own mind. And then you come upon the lost records, the true history of your family. History is a magical invocation, and at the end of that invocation, if it is correctly done, all boundaries will dissolve into the stone, the lapis, a transdimensional vehicle that can move through space and time, that is the collectivity of all human souls, free at last in what William Blake called the divine imagination. We see that this thing, this transcendental object at the end of time, this attractor that chose us out of the animal kingdom and sculpted the neocortex, opposed the thumb, stood us on our hind legs, gave us binocular vision. This thing is calling us toward itself across eons of cosmic time. We are asked to mirror it, and as we mirror it, we become more of its essence. And as we become more of its essence, we leave behind the animal organization that we were cast in the beginning. I mean, have you ever stopped to consider how many people didn't screw up for you to be sitting here tonight? Your ancestors, how many times there were opportunities for, the saber-toothed tiger to strike back, or the hunt to fail, or the fever to sweep through, or the breast to go dry, or how many times were there opportunities that somebody had their eye on the ball, somebody paid attention. The point is
there is an organized, intelligent universe of meaning that is trying to break through into the chaotic human world. It's the plan from the unconscious. And we are frozen, twisted. It's been a long, rough ride. We can hardly see straight. And yet, we need to back down, step aside, and surrender. And the voices are being heard. We know what needs to be done. It's that ideology must be abandoned. Nature must be served. The future must be served. I mean, these are hardly, argumentative positions. Yet who the hell is taking them? And yet we must.
And we insert ourselves like ants or honeybees into hierarchies of knowledge. So we say, well, what's going on in the world? Well, turn on CNN, and then somehow we're ordered. Then we say, okay, it's 85 degrees in Baghdad and the wind is out of the northeast at 15 miles an hour. And we feel somehow better now because we're getting the information. But what we have done is sold out direct experience, and all institutions require this of us, that we somehow redefine ourselves for the convenience of the institution. And this redefinition always involves a narrowing, a denial.
In a way, you could almost say that culture is a defense against the sense of this thing, the wholly and totally other, which is there. And when culture fails, when culture has nothing more to say to you, such as when you're on your deathbed and, what's being sold down at the market no longer has any interest for you, and what's on TV seems irrelevant because you're going to die in the next hour. In other words, once you move beyond cultural values, then this terror, this awesome thing waits.
The world is made entirely of something that, for want of a better word, we would have to call magic. That, things are not what they appear, not at all what they appear, and that what we call reality is just some kind of utterly provisional construct that, if leaned upon too hard, can just fly to pieces before your startled eyes. Well, then the question is, what are the implications of this? What lies behind it? So forth and so on. This entirely goes against our Cartesian expectation that thoughts inside, world outside, objects outside, perceptions inside. And this is actually nothing more, this inside-outside thing, than an artifact of European languages. And yet, we take it to be, how God made the world, basically, because we are so embedded in our language that we cannot cognize reality without it.
The future lies in the imagination. the imagination is going to get louder and louder and louder. This is all about the rules of mind overwhelming the rules of physics. The rules of physics say, you are a body, you are on a planet, you have weight, you have momentum, you have specific gravity, you must behave like this and like this and like this. And mind says, no, I want to be pure, unleashed conceptuality. I want to be a thought blown in a hyperdimensional wind. I want to move from planet to planet with the twink of an eye. I want to know everything, see everything, be everything, feel everything. And then by that means, somehow, I will make my way back to my higher and hidden source.
We are going to live in the imagination. We are preparing to decamp from three-dimensional space. I mean, yes, the earth is the cradle of the human race, but you don't stay in the cradle forever,
The key concept as we approach the eschaton is boundary dissolution. 500 years ago, half A of the planet discovered half B. There was a boundary dissolution. Then, sailing vessels, steamships, telegraphy, air flight, radio, television. What's happening is boundaries are being dissolved. Information is beginning, the planet is shrinking to a point, is what's happening. When the planet becomes a point, in a sense, we all are everywhere. That is the exteriorization of the soul. In other words, everywhere is here. What is not here is nowhere. And that seems to be where all this technology and novelty is pushing us. And if that's where we're going, then it will not stop until we achieve it. And what does it mean? I think it means we're inventing omnipotence. We, who began as the mud of a warm pond 1 billion years ago, actually dream of deity. And Plato was onto this game 2,500 years ago. He said, if God does not exist, man will invent him. What we're doing is we're building a nervous system. We're building a nervous system the size of this planet. And we're doing it fast.
It's essentially a siren. We're building a siren which calls the resources of future humanity, millions and millions of years in the future, into the late 20th century or early 21st century historical situation.
Nobody's begun to tell the people about this. The people thought, well, if we get used to the internet, maybe it will stop. No. The internet is nothing compared to what's coming.
That whether you're a horrified pessimist or a gung-ho optimist, everybody can see that the make or break point is coming up.
We had to abandon the naivete of alchemy to achieve its goals, which were mastery of space and time. Well, at the center of the alchemical ideal was the idea of the stone, something part mineral, part mental, part spiritual, something drawn out of nature, but perfected by human artifice, and then reflecting back upon man a perfect world created through magic.
In other words, what would we do if we could do anything? The implication of that, carried to its ultimate
extreme leads to a conclusion most people find too wild to entertain. If the universe is evolving deeper and deeper into complexity, faster and faster, that more change will happen in a single week than happened in the previous 13 billion years. The planet will be empty of anything appearing to be human life. I mean, the planet will be empty. We're going elsewhere. It's not clear exactly where elsewhere is, but that's where we're going. You know, most people think that when you get to be, I don't know, 30, 35, 40 or something, you have jumped all the hurdles. You got your college degree, you had some children, you made some money, you lost some money, maybe you had a marriage, maybe you had several. And anyway, people sort of get the feeling, well, I've done it. Actually, the major adventure still lies ahead. There is a third eye. The third eye exists, but it doesn't look out at this world. You've got two perfectly good eyes for doing that. The third eye looks out at the holographic matrix of informational totality. What we have been calling human consciousness is the only consciousness there is. It's something you tap into, not something you evolve out of yourself.
And the thing to do is to realize that you're not being borne along on the current of some kind of inevitable thing where you're embedded in it like a raisin in bread. You're able to steer.
The magical ideal is the idea that humanity is somehow the co-partner in creation, and that what God has brought into being, the human imagination can perfect, that there's some kind of an attractor, that events are not just bubbling forward probabilistically and randomly, but that they're actually caught in some kind of field that is pulling everything toward a conclusion. What will it really be? Well, I don't know. It's our child. It's all emerging from us. I think we're going to get the answer to the question, is man good?
We dragged ourselves out of the sea of telepathic interconnected signification that united all life, and we exist panting and pop-eyed in this other dimension called history, ego awareness, presence of self, sense of loss, anticipation of gain, all of these dimensions that culture is an imprisoning bubble of interlocking assumptions that are like a collective hallucination. I mean, I hate to say it because it's a recursive metaphor, but culture is like a delusion.
This isn't just happening. This is all being scripted.
The global destiny of the species is somehow unfolding with the logic of a dream. Well, now a Jungian would say, no surprise here, history is the collective dream of humanity. It is run by archetypal energies. And I've noticed that while going to sleep, there is a barrier
a place in the process of going to sleep that is like a mercurial edge. I believe that the truth of the matter is far more terrifying, that the real truth that dare not speak itself is that no one is in control. While sleeping, watch. You know, we are inside some kind of engine of narrative. You can see the thumbprints of editors on our reality if you are truly paying attention. You have to look very carefully at how unrandom and how mythical and archetypal most people's lives are. The secret of taking hold of one's destiny is to understand that one is a character. I mean, you can launch your story. I think the primary insight is to have understood finally that information is primary, that this world, this cosmos, this universe, this body and soul are all made of information. The world is made of language. The implication is that it is far more deeply open to manipulation than we ever dared dream.
I think the way to get into reality is by running the edges.
The idea that culture is not our friend, that we have been very naive about what culture is and how it is something designed for the convenience of the species. It plays with individuals, and it's almost as though culture is an enterprise self-organized to buy you off at the moment when you might be most dangerous to its values and goals.
The message that we're trying to read is the message we most fear to hear, which is that you must die to experience eternal life.
A glacier rattles in the cupboard. The desert sighs in the bed. And the crack in the teacup opens, a door to the land of the dead.
I mean, we are all just swarms of personalities. The idea that a healthy person has a unified identity is just a silly idea. It's one of those incredibly weird simplifications that once made, everybody lines up and salutes, no matter how much agony it causes individuals. He said autonomous portions of the psyche escape the ego's control. Well, then what are we? Are we, in fact, not what we think we are?
It is a linguistic structure. You can decondition yourself sufficiently to actually step outside the cultural illusion. It's a breathtaking possibility because nobody knows what's outside the cultural illusion. I mean, Plato got it right. We are chained in a cave watching the flickering shadows of something. It's very interesting. The world is like a labyrinth, or as I said yesterday, it will be mastered by a feat of understanding somehow. It's like a riddle. I
have been in places where, had I stayed there, they just would have warehoused me in some back ward and checked in once a week and cleaned me up, and that's where I would stay.
The danger is madness.
It's horrifying to think that some of these places you pass through for a few moments might persist for hours, days, weeks. And a week is a long, long time to wander in the land of the shades. This is the edge of paranoia.
What you have to do, what you must do, is learn to shut up. There's a compulsion to confess as well. This is not easy because there's something about these perceptions that have to be communicated. And yet when you communicate them, people are appalled.
The element of fear is always there.
There's this horrifying quote from Jung where he says, the psyche has 1,000 ways to terminate a life that has become meaningless. I don't know what was going on. Me trying to figure out, is he dead? Is he alive? What does this mean? Who am I? What's going on? And then there was a person who was obviously an inmate of the stranger wards of this mental hospital, who was washing the floor with this big mop and sort of waltzing around us with this crazy expression and leaning over and looking at me and looking at him. And I just didn't know whether, is this really happening? And if it is happening, why is it happening? And if it isn't happening, why do I think this is what's happening? And I just walked the streets for hours, and my mind was like spinning, just saying, something terrible has happened, something terrible, terrible, terrible has happened. And it took days. I mean, I was deeply spun by all of this crazy shit. I had friends in the city who would say, in Manhattan, they would say, let's hit the streets and mess with people's minds. Well, you quickly discover there are people out there capable of messing with your mind, and more than your mind.
When you're out in the billows, you are against the power of mind, up against the power of mind to such a degree that you know that the entire enterprise hangs in the balance, that the mind actually holds the key to life and death, and that those parts of your control board which are normally masked from you are suddenly unmasked, and the buttons are there for you to manipulate to the degree that you understand them.
I noticed a rising anxiety that I couldn't control, and the anxiety was it was a generalized anxiety. It was a feeling, a strong feeling that something was wrong. And so then I would stop and deal with this feeling that something is wrong, and I would look around and reassure myself, nothing is wrong. Nothing is wrong. 30 seconds later, something is wrong. After about 4 or 5 times of this, and the loop was getting faster and shorter, and you keep looking around, and then it's there. You say, oh, well, it is there. And now I feel like it's not there. Oh, yes, it's there. Well, this is crazy making, and it may not sound so agonizing, but I found it to be as close to madness as anything I've ever experienced. And I felt at times that they'll just find me here, just gibbering. They'll just, throw a light net over me and take me by the elbow and lead me away, and that'll be it. Mind is a fragile construct.
There is an element of risk. I never tell people that there isn't.
There's also fear of madness.
It is a frontier of wholeness into which any person so motivated and so courageous as to wish to do it can go and leave the mundane plane far behind. In other words, it is a dimension of vertical gain that is real and is present in all of our lives, and that we do not acknowledge except as an anomaly because we have been told that it's an anomaly. We have been told that these perceptions have to be devalued.
The rules and models that we've been handed by science and what's called common sense are just totally found to be inadequate. I simply mean when we go into solitude, when we go into wilderness, when we endure great travail in our lives, or when we put ourselves in extraordinary alien circumstances, then it's as though the membrane grows thin and the world loses its mundane character. And instead, things previously mundane begin to become charged with psychic energy. They become carriers of meaning. They become carriers of meaning. This is very peculiar because everything is imbued with significance. That tree, that person, that greeting, that conversation is imbued with a kind of depth and significance that is satisfying. It's like living deeply, living deeply. But this phenomenon can proceed to a deeper level of introspection and relationship to the exterior. And in that case, then, this significance, which everything was previously seen to have, begins to compress or densify, and the world begins to dissolve into animate intelligence. Now, at this point, if you didn't bargain for this, you're probably very concerned about your mental condition. And if you aren't, your friends are. Because what you're saying at this point is, the rivers talk to me, the trees whisper in my ear. What you're recovering is the meaning. That's all, the meaning that is self-evident in nature, but that we block. The meaning is so pregnant in everything that it can actually articulate itself in your native English tongue. And, talking rocks, talking trees, talking boulders, we define this as pathology. But what's actually happening is that for the first time in somebody's life or experience, they are meeting the resident meaning in reality with its force, unblunted by conditioning and denial.
Fear is like a wind, and it blows through the mind. And what you must do is you must wait. And it cannot sustain itself unless you give it an object.
The relationship between the edge of knowledge and the wilderness, that's where the real boundary is. It's not a physical boundary. When they first began digging, like in the 14th century in Europe, they figured out how to dig mines deeper than they had ever dug before. Before that time, no mine in the world had gone deeper than 1,000 feet. And suddenly they were able to push these mines deep, deep into the ground in Bohemia, Switzerland, southern Germany. And they encountered for a couple of hundred years elf attacks and gnome sightings and attacks in these dark galleries of these deep mines. The question is, well, are there elves in deep mines in Europe? Well, apparently there were once. And then there's a more serious kind of bummer, which I call a cognitive hallucination. You could discover a tumor in your brain, or you could discover a demon living within you. Just allow it to blow through you.
As you start into the spiral, there is the possibility of falling from the golden track into eternal death. But it is only a crisis of a moment. It's a crisis of passage. People have feared to place themselves on the line and to actually wrestle with life and death out there in those strange Bardo-like dimensions, not realizing that there is no other way to win true knowledge. I mean, it cannot be easily come by. There is no knowledge without risk-taking. Time is the moving image of eternity, as Plato said.
But I'm beginning to understand how, no matter how hard you try, no matter how intellectually vigilant you are, it's very hard not to be a creature of your own time. Then we will have to go deeper.
So, the plot thickens, the stakes rise, or to put it another way, the way things are now is not the way they were once, and not the way they soon will be. You know, this is a choice which as a culture we face. Are we to go into the divine imagination and create starships the size of Manitoba that will ply between here and Andromeda and exist in a world of our complete syntactical self-expression? Or is man's place humbler than that? Is that grandiose, steeped with megalomania, touched with the kind of political taint that's had us raping and pillaging ever since we got out of those miserable icebound villages in Jutland or wherever it was? Is it that? Is this our home to be cherished and nurtured, an incredible pearl flung out in a universe of ashes and darkness? Or is this a hell world, a tiny confining prison at the edge of a dying universe from which it is our destiny to break free and recover our higher and hidden nature from which we have become separated? I think, in a way, what we're doing is we're erasing the boundaries between technology and nature. And I'm not sure whether we can maintain our hold on the human form, or whether we will even want to. What we are about to run into is something much more peculiar. Let's call it a mirror traveling backward at the speed of light through time. Let's call it, last week's laundry list. Whatever you call it, the point is, it's going to blow your mind. is to push the edges. We shouldn't huddle together in cities. We should break out, go to the edge. As individuals, we have been too willing to be taught and led, when what is really out there to blow your mind is not some regurgitation of previously achieved conclusions, but experience. The world is far weirder than the maddest among us suppose. It seems to me that the signs are all around us. This is a phenomenon of the final moments of the cosmic drama. And I think it's tremendously exciting. I think this is what nature set about 700 million years ago on this planet. That it's not about chipmunk after chipmunk after chipmunk for eon after eon after eon. I mean, a little of that goes a long ways. I'm sure you'll agree with me. We are making it very difficult for ourselves to continue with business as usual by replicating like fleas, by cutting down the forests, by instilling in every tiny beating heart of us the desire for a Mercedes, a triple-car garage, and a house in Saint-Tropez. We are making ordinary history impossible. There hasn't been an experiment of this grandiosity since amphibians began intoxicating themselves on brief gulps of air. At the end of the 20th century, with all the contradictions of Western civilization seething in our laps, it now turns out that there is a kind of redemption that hovers in an intermediate space between secular and religious. It isn't the return of the goddess. It isn't divine retribution. It's the laws of physics seem to be about to rescue us from ourselves. That history is an anticipation. History is the last call that the train is leaving the station. The soul is actually an entity in history seeking to be born, and that the enterprise of history is the creation of the collectivity as an eternal, indestructible, trans-dimensional object.
Each advance into novelty occurs more quickly. Well, this is, in our age, no mere abstraction. This is the fabric and feeling of our lives, because we can actually feel the temporal continuum accelerating. We can hear the roar of the cataracts at the end of time. Intelligence is special when compared to stupidity, but no one holds the patent on intelligence. I don't believe that intelligence is something that you're born with. Intelligence is something that you learn.
Language was clearly a strategy for binding time. That's what you do with it. That's why we live in a different kind of time world than the animals do.
We cannot move any faster than the language that we evolve, and we cannot move into the future any faster than the ideas that we generate. You will be given a technique. It will change your lives beyond recognition. It will appear magical, but no laws of physics will be broken.
The presence of thinking human beings on this planet, the presence of technologies, the presence of ourselves is part of the concrescence. In other words, we are the indicator species for the nearby presence of the transcendental object. If this planet only held muskrats, toucans, and amoebas, no problem. But our appetite for history and for technology means we are being drawn toward something unimaginable which is shaping us to its agenda. Very shortly, the instability built into the system is going to transform material existence beyond all imagining. The culture, the global civilization is dying. There are too many problems. They're accumulating. You have to be blind to not realize that this is really, in fact, the end of the road. We can see the finite limits coming at us at light speed right now. It's almost over. And we close our minds to it because the only over that we can conceive of is the yawning grave. But how about a different version of over? How about a transubstantiant apotheosis that leads to concrescent immersion in the unspeakable mystery that is the strange attractor at the end of the process of becoming throughout all space and time?
This is what the flying saucer is, in my estimation. It's nothing more than an organometallic projection of the future state of the human soul.
It's a delusion of such power and of such elegance that it may be the truth, and time will tell.
Curiosity is the great virtue.
I think the real truth about how reality works is that it's pretty much on automatic. Chaos is the ruling player. Chance is cast in the number 2 role, and the unexpected is in there somewhere. You know, we sit here with the assumption that we're all in the same universe, more or less, and that we're all experiencing the same reality, more or less. But this is just a polite fiction. I mean, if we were to go around this circle and instead of telling your name and your professional occupation, you were asked to explain how a common household device works, I think we would largely discover that if anything past the most trivial level, it just turns into elves and goblins out there.
The frontier of our species is the imagination. Now we have to take that slogan and somehow turn it into a technology. How can we go to the place where ideas come from? How can we somehow separate our architectonic fantasies from the ongoing momentum of the planet? When you extrapolate a visionless future, even as much as 3 or 4 decades into the future, you see the accumulation of problems on such a scale that then there will be no pulling out of the power dive. But the boundary dissolution that we all can experience by submitting ourselves to the atemporal information bank of the planet, the morphogenetic fields of the planet, past, present, and future, are what are being transmitted
out of the vegetable matrix and into animal life. And animal life is a kind of being lost in time, a kind of victimized state. I think information from this hyper-temporal domain beyond the end of history, a very small amount of this information tunnels backward naturally as a kind of leaky process, and that this is what shamanism and religious sensitivity and poetry and everything that characterizes our humanism is about. We are quite literally that animal that can sense the future, and being able to sense it over the past 100,000 years, we have gone in search of it. In the same way that an animal can smell water on the wind and can then go in search of water and eventually find the water hole, because of our large brain capacity, because information is a quantum mechanically expressed state in the brain, we can smell the future and have been able to do so for 50, 60,000 years. We are to life what life is to the inorganic realm. This is a real mystery, the only one I know. This is the thing that you hope exists and assume doesn't if you're a reasonable person. The doorway stands open, and all it requires is courage, which is not to say it doesn't require a lot. It does require a lot, but what it is courage. This is like a secret of some sort, and it's a true secret in that telling it does not give it away. I know this because I've been trying to tell the secret for 25 years to anyone who would listen. And it's the idea that we are making the world moment to moment. Somehow it depends on our existence. And of course, immediately following that assumption is the idea that we can change it with our mind, which brings up the moral dilemma. Then why is it so resistant, or why isn't it the way we want it to be? The universe is a puzzle. Life is a problem to be solved. It's a conundrum. It's not what it appears to be. There are doors, there are locks and keys, there are levels, and if you get it right, somehow it will give way to something extremely unexpected. It permits magic because it says behind the laws of physics is a deeper level, and if you can reach that deeper level, you can make changes there. Worry presupposes that you understand what's going on, and I think it's safe to say that we do not have a clue. We can't even tell whether it's a happy ending or a catastrophe. We can't tell whether we're slamming into the wall of our cultural limits at 50,000 miles an hour, or we're about to go hand in hand off to the galactic center with the human soul as companion and vehicle. It's okay. Basically we're going to make it. We've been on a straight line vector for millions of years with this transcendental attractor that has shaped us, called us out of matter, and is revealing itself through us. But knowing that is not permission for sitting on your can or ceasing to participate in the struggle to create a just and caring society. It does mean that you shouldn't worry, that worry is off the menu, that you don't know enough to worry. Every electron
is the yawning mouth of a wormhole that leads to quadrillions of higher dimensional universes that are completely beyond rational apprehension. Matter is not lacking in magic. Matter is magic. People say, well, but that's crazy. I mean, what kind of universe is that? And it's hard for people to even realize what I might be talking about, because they believe that something like logical consistency or ability to be reduced to mathematical formalism is how you judge the efficacy of an idea. But actually, this is what has led us into this extremely alienated state. It's that we haven't demanded that the stories we tell ourselves about how the world works confirm our direct experience of how it works.
You know, people say, well, how can you tell one theory from another, and is science better than religion, and this and that? After a lot of arm waving, it should be conceded that the final call is aesthetic. This is the great turning point. I mean, I think that the design process, whatever that means, must become conscious. The simultaneous project of awakening and the simultaneous project of entering deeper into the dream for the purpose of cultivating, evoking, experiencing, remembering, transmitting, and communicating beauty, which feeds back into the awakening process.
Culture is not your friend. Culture itself is some kind of neotenizing force, because what culture provides is a bunch of rules, so you don't have to think, and a bunch of myths, so you don't have to think again. The culture has all the answers, you know. You want to know where people came from? Well, when the sky god got out of his canoe at first waterfall and took a leak, then we, the true people, appeared like ants, and we've been living here ever since. Oh, gee, thanks. I'm glad I asked. You know, this is what culture does for you. Nobody is in control. This stuff is ruled by the equations of dynamics and chaos. To contact the cosmic giggle, to have the flow of casuistry begin to give off synchronistic ripples, white caps in the billows of the coincidental ether, if you will. To achieve that, it requires, a precondition is a kind of unconsciousness, a kind of drifting, a certain taking your eye off the ball, a certain assumption that things are simpler than they are.
This is what it's like when a species prepares to depart for the stars. This is not unusual. I mean, the earth quakes, the oceans boil, the planet came into existence for this. All life for over 1 billion years has been pointed toward taking this step. You know, leaving the oceans for the land was dress rehearsal for what will now be done. And, you know, it's chilling because it's so huge. Each thing that we do anticipates this deeper fall inward into the dream. The dream is what awaits us at the end of history. Well, the dream is a place where the laws are set by the imagination. The imagination is God in the dream. And if there is a way for us to mirror our highest aspirations, in other words, to inculcate the God image in ourselves, then it's by becoming the masters of our dream and then creating a way to share that so that we each then are a God with an open office doorway to all the other gods who wander through looking at the cosmogonies that we produce as art. The imagination is the real frontier. This is why the poets and the artists are so important. I mean, all these visions and dreams that we have will be realized. I mean, in ways that we cannot imagine, but realized nevertheless. This has been consistently what has been going on. The alchemical dreams of the 16th century are fully realized in the 20th century, you know. And, of course, it has facets that they never imagined. And that actually the universe is made by mind, within and without organism, and that mind is capable of bootstrap leaps in its organizational self-expression, and that we are privileged to be the witnesses of the final act of life going through some kind of immense transformative unfolding from itself in a kind of vortex which has been building on this planet for billions of years. I mean, I'm fascinated that we've gotten this far, given that the most economical situation would be pure nothingness. What is this? I mean, why is nature doing these things? And why is organization have such a tenacity? And what does it mean that we appear so late in the process and represent such a difference in the rest of nature? It's very mysterious. We get used to reality because it's so stable, but in fact it's an absolutely confounding situation.
We are creatures of the dream.
We should live as though the apocalypse has already occurred. That's the only way to transcend the historical hysteria. We seem to function well under pressure, and now we are coming under pressure. Not this. This is not pressure. This is the long garden party before pressure, when people can still, worry about whether they're getting enough antioxidants and so forth and so on. Not to gore anyone's particular ox. I'm as concerned about antioxidants as the next person. I think that everything is under control, that we are in the grip of a force so powerful that the notion that we could jeopardize or overthrow it is completely preposterous. When of course being is fraught with danger, but the stakes are, to be at play in the fields of the Lord, to be at rest in the mansions of the goddess. And it's
it's soon.
My point here that I want to try to sell you on is that nature is a novelty-conserving engine of some sort. That far from being a random process driven toward entropy by the second law of thermodynamics, nature is a process of complexification. That whenever this process is dealt a blow, it immediately sets out to recover and surpass whatever previous level of complexification it had attained. We are the most complex phenomenon that we know of on this planet.
We are, in fact, that part of nature which has been deputized for a purpose. We are the energy gathering aspect of the Gaian mind.
We are not lost in a mute, uncaring, purposeless universe. How anybody could ever suppose this? It takes an extraordinary power of the denial of simple observation to come to this conclusion. Nevertheless, this is what modern science tells us.
If you go into nature alone and don't eat much and don't speak much, within 72 hours, the hills speak and the winds confer with you, and you are conveyed into an animate, caring, living, natural dynamic. But it's threatening to the ego. This is the first time in 2 hours I've used this word. But the ego is a maladaptive, tumor-like growth in the personality that has been inculcated into you by the toxicity of culture.
Culture is a form of enforced infantilism. It's the last nursery, and most people never leave it. And they are perfectly happy to interpret the world through the reassuring nonsense of their cultural values, whatever they may happen to be.
The richest world is within, and that you promote a balance with the exterior world, but then the purpose of the leisure created when you have achieved balance is not then to accumulate things, but to explore the interior horizon of transcendence. What is happening is that more and more we perfect the aspiration to vertical ascent. Apparently a biological drive. I mean, some people have suggested it's a nostalgia for the canopies of the rainforests that no longer exist. But whatever it is, it's going to take us eventually out to the stars and inward to the stars, because, the real question mark which hangs over all this is the nature of mind. And we do not know what mind is. And yet everything goes on upon the stage that is conditioned by and assumes mind as a given. And every society has assumed that it had the answers, that just 15 years more of fine-tuning of the current ideology would do it. And no society has ever been right about that. So why should we be right? We are hurtling toward an unimaginable future in the same way that our present would have been unimaginable to people 200 or 500 years ago. but it is the imagination, because it is consciousness that is growing and expanding and strengthening itself. These people were able to see into the quantum mechanical foundations of thought and consciousness, and they noticed there a flux, which they called the Tao, and it was a thing which came and went. The Tao Te Ching says the way that can be told of is not an unvarying way. And they stilled their body functions and they looked inward with a cataloging, analytical mentality. And they noticed that while this flux was variable, it seemed to be not infinite in its contributing factors, but that in fact it seemed to have a pattern. And they discerned the pattern as revolving around the number 64. In other words, they discerned through this process of meditation that there is not one kind of time or two kinds of time, but actually 64 facets of the possible temporal jewel. Time is not simply the dimension of duration required for the successive occurrence of occasions. It is rather some kind of conditioned topological manifold. We can think of it as a fluid medium flowing across a surface, a river, in other words. Then you see that what's really being offered is a map of time. It's saying that the condition of knowing a fading past and facing an unanticipatable future is not an ontologically given necessity of existence. That it is possible to imagine an existence in which one saw into time the way we as animals see into the space in front of us, so that we are able to run and leap and dance among the rocks. It's because we can see into space. A creature or a culture that could see into time could anticipate where the river of time would flow quickly, where it would broaden out and move slowly with a rich sense of the conservation of accomplishments achieved, where it would cascade and break up its previous patterns and produce great cataracts of novelty. A civilization which knew these things, or a person which knew these things about their own life, would claim a new dimension of existential freedom for being. The past and the future are co-present in the now. They are in fact what's making it happen.
The universe is not a purposeless explosion running down into entropy, but in fact the universe is some kind of process that is running along fairly well-defined runnels. In other words, it is not a flat surface over which we are free to lurch and careen in some kind of random walk or parody of Brownian motion. It isn't that at all. It is a topology. It is a surface, a slalom, whose high walls confine us as we move deeper and deeper into the process of complexification. We move into that process faster and faster and faster.
People have felt a vague thing calling across time to humanness, calling us to be a certain way, to practice certain rituals, to observe the stars, to observe the plants, to observe birth and observe death. A calling, and that thing which some people have called God, whatever it is throwing a gigantic shadow over human history now, because now the creode of development that leads to our merging with this thing, the walls are very steep, the water is moving very swiftly, and it's almost as though the future event is throwing off great sparks that are themselves faceted, contradictory epitomizations of this mystery. This is what a Mohammed and Christ and Buddha are. They are human personalities that were situated in time in such a way that they became macrocosmic reflections of the superordinate Adamic humanity that is going to be generated at the end of history. To be a being in time is to share in the immense flood of precognitive anticipation that fills the universe in anticipation of this event. This is not simply a phenomenon of biology. This is the unfolding of a general law of which biology is only the cutting edge of a wedge of becomingness which includes all being and reaches right down into the neutrinos. In other words, science, meaning physics at this point, prosecuted its agenda of deconstructing nature to the point where it let loose the elves of madness, paradox, contradiction, and peculiarity, and that can now never be put back. I mean, the dirty little secret is that at bedrock, the universe is more like a DMT flash than it is like an 18th century garden party, as we were previously assured by the practitioners of science. It seems to me that what we are is a kind of morphogenetic field that at death ceases to interact with matter. But there is no reason to suppose that the field disappears or ceases to exist.
The human being of human beings desires to be released into the imagination, and until we confront death with the attitude that it is the after-death state that needs to enter history, there will be a great deal of anxiety, and we will be much closer to the end of history that I think we all desire, and a release of the human species and individual into the dream.
The purpose of history is to create planetary crisis, and it's doing a splendid job of it. I cannot see how anyone could assume that human history will go on not forever, but let's say as long as it has gone on. Can anyone imagine the next 10,000 years of technological development and global civilization? It's a joke. Can anyone imagine the next 1,000 years or 100 years? And religions, great religions that involve the fates of hundreds of millions of people, are intimations of this transcendental object at the end of time. And they all get it wrong, of course. They get it wrong because it is always filtered through the vicissitudes of the historical moment and the political needs of those who are telling the tale. But if you take all of these things not as God's revealed truth, but more as God's image in the funhouse mirror of bent ideology, you can sort of extract out of all these images a sense of what the transcendental reality must be like. If it is not a law of the universe, then it will become a myth of human beings and be created anyway. So since we are human beings, I see us as the central actors in that mandala. I mean, this is the task of the next 100 or 500 years, to realize the alchemical nature of humanity and being, and have everything fused into a supernuminous concrescence that is time. Joyce said, all space in a nutshell. You know, all time bound into a lenticular vehicle, which is both everyone's and mine alone. The window of perception is cleansed, and then you see through into an infinite, holographic, recursive world of mind and affectionate intelligence. And somehow this mystery is in the body, and therefore outside of time, and therefore beyond, in some sense, the reach of culture. That's leaving home. The body is not a thing, nor is it a process. It is a window of opportunity which opens into eternity. But we see the consequences of not feeling all around us. I mean, the toxification of the earth, the toleration of overpopulation, and the institutions that promote it is all achieved through a deadening of feeling. If we could feel what we are doing to the earth, to the elderly, to the young, to racial and social minorities, if we could feel the agony of what we do, we would stop doing it. But we have what we call reasons for why it is the way it is. Arguments, theories, blame, it's somebody else's fault, or the poor are always with us, or something else. But these are all evasions of the obligation to create a community based on love and tolerance. Hardly a radical notion, and yet incredibly difficult to bring into existence. We need to live our lives in the light of the assumption of an open future, not an absolutely free future, but not a determined future.
The collapse of everything familiar is going to open our hearts. I mean, look at what AIDS has done. Look at what the information we have about the rainforest, or the pictures of Somalia. I mean, the most open-hearted of us open first. But before this is over, every one of us will probably bury the dead and walk through, hell. And it will open the heart. It can't fail to open the heart. I mean, when a friend dies in your arms, maybe the first time it doesn't work, but the second, the third, the fourth, we are going to get it sooner or later. And it's bigger than all of us. It's just so big. And it's always been there in miniature in the phenomenon of our own deaths. But we don't look at that. But, if you will contemplate your own death, your heart will open. The truth that I've learned
this is the hardest truth there is. This is the distillation of 50,000 years of nomadic hunting and orgies around the campfire and rockets to the moon and the whole thing. It can be summed up in a single phrase: nothing lasts. Nothing lasts. Everything is changing into something else. Heraclitus said this. He said, "Pante rea," all flows. We flow into this world, we inhabit it, and we move on. Nothing lasts. Not your career, not your fortune, and finally not even your own sweet self. Everything is replaced. And if we can open ourselves to this by the heart, by the mind, I mean, there's all ways, then we will find the dignity to, and this is not about being born in the generation at the end of the world. This is something that would have worked at every moment in history. After all, Heraclitus lived 2,500 years ago. This is the truth of true maturity. Nothing lasts. I mean, every time I take a trip or eat a fine meal or make love or visit an art gallery, I feel the transience of it, and that enriches it. That's the heart dimension, is the poignancy of knowing that this too shall pass. This too shall pass. You know, the earliest piece of poetry in English is called Deor's Lament, and it begins, 9 winters we Eltheow held Marenglenberg. That now is gone, this too shall pass. It was a song sung by a poet to a king somewhere in France in the 10th century or something like that. Everything is in transition, and the material body resists this truth, because the material body understands that if it passes, then it will be replaced by something which it can't imagine, and that triggers an anxiousness. Nothing lasts, and if we can incorporate that and live it, we will live every moment to its fullest.
William Blake said, "Attend the minute particulars. Pay attention to the details. Keep your eye on the ball. Man is a reed bent by the wind, but he is a thinking reed." And that's the paradox of our being, our fragileness in nature, and yet the supernatural grandiosity that we sense in the hallways of our souls. What we have been celebrating here is an experience. It is there to be had, out there in nature, with nothing between you and it. No guru, no method, no teacher, just you and me and Mother Nature in the garden, wet with rain. You can choose to go out there and meet it, but it's not an easy path, because it's the real path. And the fear is real, and the risk is real, and the reward is real. It's beyond hype.